again with my friend Alex Babin, our powerlifting expert. In our last capsule, we talked about the importance of high frequency and focusing on the big lifts if you want to become really good at them. I think that you will agree that and you see people really majoring in the minors, right? They fall in love with assistance exercise. They really believe that somewhere, somehow, more assistance work automatically will make their big lifts go up. I think it's human nature when you think about it. I mean, the more work I do, the better. I mean, just look at when people get started in training. They're training either for bodybuilding, just getting in shape. What do? They do pretty much every single exercise in the book. So when these people migrate toward powerlifting, I think that many of them will keep on that exact same mindset of the more assistance exercise I do, the less weaknesses I'm gonna have. And really that can come to bite you in the ass. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that, but I think it's a double-edged sword. I think you can definitely do too much assistance, and like you said, major and the minors, you know, I don't know if you want to touch a little bit about the West Side training, but so the West Side has developed a ton of champions in powerlifting, and they've done, you know, Louis Simmons has done great work for powerlifting.
I think it's really important, and sorry I'm cutting you
off. Go ahead.
That every time either myself, Alex, or other member of our team, when you talk about established experts that have proven themselves time and time again, it's never to pick a fight with them. Even if you're an expert, even ourselves, I mean, we deserve to be questioned and our methods analyzed, because just because you produce champions, these guys might have been like exceptional athletes. The environment might have been conducive to really pushing yourself hard. So I think that, and again, these are advanced athletes. So like we said in the other capsule, just because something works for a very advanced athlete doesn't mean it's the right solution for you. I mean, if you already have perfect squatting technique, bench pressing technique, you probably don't need to practice those movements 5 times a week. But if you're a beginner, maybe not practicing the squat, the actual competition squat at all, is not the right way to do things, right?
Yeah.
So,
I was just going to talk about using bands and chains, and that's why I talked about Westside a little bit, because they revolutionized the world of powerlifting using accommodating resistance. They use the bands and chains on the lift, and I've seen some horrendous things in the gyms where guys would put bands around an easy bar and curl with reverse bands.
I've done that.
You know what I mean? Most probably. So you can cut that part out, but. And I think, like you said, majoring in the minors, I think you should know when to use an accessory exercise. You should know when to use a variation exercise, what you're using it for, not just because it looks cool. And yeah, sure, using a couple of chains on each side of the bar looks manly. It looks brutal, it's grueling, but there's a reason why there should be a reason why you're using chains, and there should be a reason why you're using bands, and there should be a reason why you're using such variation exercises. Like a safety squat bar has its place, but if you don't have a good squat to start with and you're not really practicing your squat, then you should probably spend more time squatting with a bar on your back than using all those other implements.
Yeah, I believe that there's, of course, the cool factor, but there's also the fact that most people don't realize what these tools are good for. I mean, chains, accommodating resistance, of course, it's because these guys are equipped powerlifters, right? So they need to be stronger at the top end of the range of motion.
Right, exactly.
So for these people, there's a drastic benefit of accommodating resistance, because in the specific sport of powerlifting, with bench shirt, with squat suits, with tight knee wraps, then it kind of mimics the strength curve of the movement, because the equipment helps you during the first part of the movement. But if you just want to get strong or doing raw powerlifting, which is, thank God, making a comeback, then these tools might not be the best use. In which situation would...
Even, sorry, I cut you off. Even the way that you're performing the movement is different. When you're using a suit to squat, it's a predominant glute and hamstring movement. You're trying to sit back as far as possible and as wide as possible. It's like a sumo squat, really, to stretch the suit as possible, as much as possible, to get the most benefit out of the suit, to get the rebound. And so that's why you were saying, that's why the top of the movement is where there's the most weight on the bar, right? So that's why using accommodating resistance, like chains, where the most weight is at the top, has a carryover to using to doing geared lifting. But if you're looking at raw lifting, raw squatting, for example, you shouldn't sit that far back. You don't have a suit. You should use your quads. There should be some knee flexion in the movement. As long as the bar path is one straight line and the rest of your body is adapting to that bar path, then your squat is good. So you're gonna need some knee flexion in there. If you always focus on sitting back so much, you're not using the mechanics of your body as efficiently as possible.
Yeah, and also...
And look at all the top dogs in raw powerlifting. They all have huge, massive quads. There's a reason for that. Dan Green, yeah. But Eric Spoto.
And also and they basically squat, it's a cross between a typical powerlifting squat and an Olympic lifting squat. You look at the Russian powerlifters, they don't squat that much differently than their Olympic weightlifters. It's not like fully upright, but it's not like the lean back squat either. Now, I think that one problem also is that when you have a suit, when you're squatting, for example, it kind of not completely take away, but takes some of it away, that the need to have strong tension in the bottom of a squat. And I think that if the suit, or in the case we're talking about the chains and bands, with the lower resistance in the bottom, subconsciously you can actually release some of the tension because the body doesn't feel the need to stabilize as much.
Box squat.
Yeah.
The box squat is a perfect example. So the West Side training approach is really a conjugate method that was made in Louis Simmons' mold, where he said 90% of your squats should be box squats. And we should always be using accommodating resistance such as chains and bands. Now, the thing with a box squat is, and don't get me wrong, I use the box squat. The box squat has its place in training, especially for beginners that don't have the proprioception to tell them where the proper depth is to get down in a squat, where your hip crease has to be lower than your knees. But sitting on a box when you're squatting, exactly, you release some of that tension, you sit far back, and so most of the weight is at the top of the movement. So I think doing pause squats, and that's one of my favorite variation exercises because it really helps you to, on the contrary, stay tight in the bottom.
Most people need to be stronger in the bottom, not at the top.
Exactly.
In most cases.
For raw,
for raw, exactly, because the suit will, of course, change the strength there. But with raw lifters, the weakest position will always be in the first bottom, especially if you don't use the rebound. Same thing in the bench press. So in that case, pause lifting would be much more valuable than chains and bands, especially because, and really one thing with pause lifting, I think that most people don't do it right. They just sit down in the squat. Exactly. And they let their structures hold themselves up instead of using that opportunity to practice tension.
Yeah. That's exactly. Pause movements such as Spoto presses on the bench, pause squats, pause deadlifts. Those movements should be used to get you accustomed and used and become a master at keeping tension in all throughout your body while you have the load in your hands or on your back. So yeah, I think pause lifting is great.
So like a pause squat, for example. Let's say it's the actual mechanic of the competition squat. Would you see that as an assistance exercise, or could it replace the actual squat for a training day? Or would you add it to the squat on a
So that'll depend on where your weakness is and how far you are from a competition. I think if you're off season, or if you're many weeks out from your meet and you have your weakness is so major in the bottom of the squat where you lose all tension, your ankles break in, your knees buckle in, you lose intra-abdominal pressure, your pelvic tilts anteriorly, your lower, your upper back loses its tension. If any of those things or all those things happen in the bottom of the squat where it's really a priority to fix, then we might start you off with some pause squats. And once you get better at this, then I'll get you to start with the squat and rebound out of the hole, but still use the pause squat as an assistance work.
I think that, and a good point here is that it should actually be trained. Using the rebound should be trained. Because if you only do pause squat and you're actually trying to use the rebound in competition, if you don't practice the rebound, then you actually have an inhibition instead of potentiation. I'm going to give an example of myself. For a few months, like years ago, I did bench press exclusively from pins. I started the barbell from about 1 inch from the chest, and I worked up to 425. So when I decided I'm going to test my bench press, I said it's going to be at least 425 because now I can use the stretch reflex. Well, I failed at 365.
Because you didn't train the stretch reflex.
Exactly. Yeah. I couldn't reverse properly.
Yeah.
So the pause squat are really important, but they can't be the only thing you're doing in training if you want to maximize your squat.
For sure, for sure. And the closer you get to a meet, you know, specificity, the law of specificity when it comes to powerlifting applies here. So the closer you get to a meet, the more your training should resemble a meet day.
So would you actually decrease the amount of like isolation bodybuilding work closer to a competition?
Yes, because the closer you get to the meet, the more the intensity increases. If the intensity increases, your volume has to go down, right? Because there's a fine line between overtraining and peaking. And when you're playing with that line, you don't want to mess with the volume too much. So you got to lower the volume and keep the intensity up because the specificity for the sport is to lift as much weight as possible.
And I think that a lot of people make that mistake because when you are like, let's say, 3, 4, 5 weeks out of a contest, adrenaline is high, you're so focused that sometimes you don't even notice you're getting tired. So you just pile on that work because you really want to do well, and you might actually be digging your own grave,
yes,
and you don't even notice it. So that's why you really have to be disciplined.
That's true, actually, because and sometimes you'll go in the gym and you'll have a really good day, you'll feel really energetic, and you'll say, hey, my meet's coming up, I gotta get good work in today. I'm gonna lift really heavy, and I'm gonna go home and really be proud of it, and it's gonna give me confidence. And that might be true in some cases, but it has to be planned, it has to be programmed, because if you don't plan it, then you're gonna mess with the intensity and the programming of the intensity, and you might mess up your peaking. And you might tire yourself out, and so you gotta know what you're doing.